We're here with Greg Travers, author of a wonderful new publication by the Tax Institute, the Tax Advisor's Guide to Part 4A. Thank you, Greg. So what this really is about is a practical guide, isn't it, that covers the wide range of situations, and it really attempts to extract from the legislation and the case law and almost what to do when facing Part 4A as a tax advisor. Can you tell us a little bit about what led you to write this book and your process in developing it?
Yeah, okay. So, you're absolutely right that that's what the book is designed to do. When the amendments were happening to Part 4A in late 2012, 2013, I started getting involved with the Tax Institute to provide sort of an SME private client perspective. And what became really apparent when we were doing that is it was just a section of the market or the taxpayer community that was neglected in a Part 4A sense. So they had all these issues that they needed to deal with, but the commentary, the materials that were around were very much directed towards the larger businesses or much more technical publications. So what we decided to do was try and write something that was directed towards general practitioners, SME clients, private business, make it really practical, get away from some of the mystery that seems to sit there in Part 4A, and try and give something to enable people to do things in a robust, an accurate way, but at the same time being very practical in the way that they're approaching it. Yeah.
Great, fantastic. Well, we're lucky enough to have Justice Richard Edmonds write the foreword for the book, Justice Edmonds of the Federal Court, and in that he touches on the lack of consensus as to whether the 2013 amendments to the law will really serve their purpose, or will they actually make things more complex and uncertain. Which side do you sit on?
I think there's no question it's going to make it more complex and uncertain, certainly in the short term. What's very apparent when you start really working through the cases and the materials over the whole time Part 4A has been in place is that we were getting to a point where there was a really good understanding as to how the provisions worked. That's changed, and it's going to be quite a few years before we get good guidance again. It's just another thing that makes it really hard for people when you've got to apply these laws. Your client walks in, sits down in your office and wants to do something, you've got to try and apply them. So what we've tried to do in the book is take the different materials that the Tax Office and Treasury and the like have put out there, glean from there how they are intending to approach the law, compare that to the way that the courts have sort of said these provisions should be applied in the past, and come up with something which should be consistent with the legislation, consistent with the past case law and everything like that, that enables people to kind of navigate how these provisions are going to work for their clients right now in the absence of having something more authoritative for them to use. Yeah.
So in terms of the concepts of Part 4A, the key concepts, and the book covers all of them, which of those concepts do you think causes the biggest headache for practitioners?
To me, it's the purpose question. Obviously there's three, there's scheme, there's tax benefit and there's purpose. Most people kind of get through scheme and tax benefit fairly well, but purpose is such a unusual concept in the way that it's used, in that it's not the subjective intent of the people. It is very much an objective intent, and it's very much based upon the 8 factors that are set out in the law, and it's a very unusual perspective that you've got to bring to what you're doing to be able to analyse it properly. Yeah, so we've put a fair bit of time into trying to come up with questions that you can ask yourself or ask your client that are going to help you make that assessment, because that's the important one.
Wonderful. How do you see the book fitting into a practitioner's workday, and what sort of circumstances and situations do you feel a practitioner will be referring to it?
Yeah, okay, so the way that we've set the book up is there's 4 distinct parts, and I think the first part is something that practitioners will take extracts from and use on a very regular basis. So there's flowcharts in there, there's checklists in there, there's worksheets in there that enable you to navigate, say, which method you need to use to determine the tax benefit, or to document your assessment of purpose. And I think people will use that essentially every day when they're doing tax matters. The other 3 parts of the book are then a whole series of case studies, and that's well indexed. So if you're dealing with a matter, it's easy to look up whether or not there's a case study that's on a fairly comparable matter. So I think you'll use that, and you'll see how Part 4A has been analysed in respect of that type of case study. We've then written a section which goes through those core concepts of scheme and purpose and tax benefit, and digs into them in a little bit more detail and addresses a lot of the questions that we tend to get asked on those. So for those that are wanting a more deeper understanding, that's there. And then we've written another section which is basically going through every one of the cases and trying to distill down hundreds of pages of case law into a few pages so you understand the core facts and you understand the key thing that's come out of that case. So again, if you hear people talking about, Hart's case, there's a really easy place for you to go, have a read, get your head around what that means, and then you can take that back and think about how it might apply to your client.
It seems to be a bit of an impression that some people have that Part 4A is not a small, medium enterprise type of game. It's a large corporate big end of town, but as we know, SMEs are often targeted more in this area. What do you see as some of the key SME cases that you cover in the book and some of those key takeaways?
Yeah, so Part 4A is very definitely an SME issue. You don't really need to look past what they've done in respect of personal services income to know how important Part 4A is. To me, the key risk areas for us in that SME space are the structuring that we do around small business concessions and trying to get better access to those, things that we do around using trusts, and some of the general tax planning that we do, and a lot of that is in the case studies that we've gone through and included in the book. What you find when you go to the cases is that most of the case law on Part 4A is dealing with larger corporates. One of the reasons for that, and it's been said a few different times, is that for the SME taxpayer, quite often they get tripped up before they get to Part 4A. So they don't implement the arrangement right, or they get caught by another avoidance provision like Division 7A or value shifting or whatever it happens to be. So Part 4A doesn't end up becoming the issue. And then litigating Part 4A is expensive. Most SMEs can't afford to do it, which is why if you've got a really good, robust way of assessing your Part 4A risk when you're doing the transaction, which is what we're trying to do in this book, it's the best way to approach it because, SME clients don't want to end up in court.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that, Greg. It's certainly a must-have in the tax advisor's armoury, and congratulations.
Yeah, thank you very much.